Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. Buckle in, this is a long one. I will never forget this nightmare. It was winter, and one of the worst winters I ever experienced. First, I'll describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream, and like I said, it's a very clear memory, just because of how scary it was. I was about 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 6 at most, and my twin brother and I had a bunk bed in a room at the furthest end of the house we grew up in. The nightmare had me in my bed looking out the window to see a red sky, the kind it gets in the early dawn hours before sunrise, but light still colors the sky. The next and only other thing I remember in this nightmare is that a man with crazy blue-colored eyes and a bald head appears at the window and stares right at me. The nightmare ends there, but I remember just how much I screamed and screamed about it. I don't know where my brother was at the time when I woke up screaming, and the only thing I can remember from when I woke up was having my mom come and get me and calm me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I only remember that so well because I wondered where my dad was at the time. Fast forward to this May, and my father is in the hospital in the country he lives in, Colombia, and my twin brother and our older sister are staying in a hotel about a 5-minute walk away from the hospital he's staying in the ICU at. One night after a long day of being there for Dad and for the extended family, my siblings and I return to the hotel and sit together to have a couple of beers and try to relax after all of that. We start discussing things, just trying to unwind, but somehow the discussion of nightmares and dreams come up, and I bring up the above story. Without missing a beat, my sister straight up explains that had really happened, that some guy really did look through my window, and that she remembers the whole thing. My sister, who is 5 years older than my brother and I, so this would make her 9 to 10 years old, had her bedroom adjacent to the bedroom my brother and I shared. Her room faced our front lawn and street, while our room faced the neighbor's house and their driveway with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't get into too much detail about the days before this nightmare/event, she said that she had been followed by a bald man in a truck as she rode her bike home with some friends a couple of times before. The day immediately before this nightmare was no different, but the man this time actually drove right past the house. At the time, she was latchkey kid since my brother and I had to go to a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown for a speech impediment that many twins have, and my mom had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister after school. But she was never home alone for more than an hour. That afternoon and evening was pretty normal as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked as a part-time cop and worked in a local hardware store. And we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did usual family things before bed. That night, around 12 to 1 a.m., this bald-headed dude had parked down the street at a small industrial park and walked up to our house and tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up, and she screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window as it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to shove the guy out or tried to hit him with the nightstick he had. My sister doesn't remember exactly, and this caused the guy to run off, but only for a short time, as he came back a moment later to try and get into the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mom didn't want my brother and I to open it because our bed was right up against it. My sister said I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom went in to get my brother, and while my dad tried to go after him by running out the front door to chase him, but to no avail as the guy hauled us right through our backyard. The way our backyard was situated had it backed up right against a small rail yard that is a part of the aforementioned small industrial park down the street from us. Between our small neighborhood and that rail yard was a good amount of very dense trees that always made the backyards very, very dark. So my dad didn't want to get attacked by him there, so instead he went back inside to our house, called the police, then our elderly neighbor, to make sure they were okay while our mom took care of us kids. That is all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this was a very long time ago. Neither of us could recall anything else after that either, and the story just sort of stops right there. My father sadly passed away in hospital, so we aren't able to ask him, and given all of that, none of us have thought to ask our mom yet, but maybe I will ask her soon. But for now, to the bald-headed creep who tried to do God knows what to my family, let's not meet. "9 years ago, I had met a person that, to this day, I still wish I never did. It was winter time, and I was more lonely than ever. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sport-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school I got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was also lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents, that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling up in excitement. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comments section. We ended up replying so much, we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks we had stored in the back of the class, and saw that she actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not as sure it was actually her name. In the message I got, Haley told me she was 2 years older than me, and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not giving a damn to anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in our DMS until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site, and in our first conversation, we at first talked on messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she told me it was only to better hold a conversation with me, and eventually after she asked me multiple times I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she then suggested we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure she was actually my age, but also to put a name to a face. Haley turned on her camera, and she did look in the same age range as me. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus that she easily smiled and spoke so friendly to me, made me feel that I had nothing to be afraid of. So that led to me quickly believe that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after, with me practically on cloud nine the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going all right. We told each other about our schools, what we liked, and gushing over our favorite series we liked. We talked almost every day, and stayed up late talking nearly all night. We even exchanged a couple of silly pictures of ourselves and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for 6 months, Haley asked me if I would like to meet her friends. At first, I was ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invites me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice, and that Haley reassured me I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so I ignored it. Most of them were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were 18-19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me they all met either on another social media site or from real life, but wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. From constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls I were on with them were pure chaos. The messages were even worse, because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that should not be brought up with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was annoying whenever I tried to talk in a conversation. Needless to say, I did not like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, dirty words, and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley, because she never acted like this with me when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly, she was talking to her other friends more than she was with me. At first I thought it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages, or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she went ballistic on me, saying that I was being selfish, and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen, and then hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me it was fine, she just needed some time alone, and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not what I thought she would. Haley began to tell me she had depression, and that was the reason she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it, and said whatever she needed to talk about she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about how shitty her home life was, and how bad her relationship was with her mom, and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she'd begin complaining about anything happening during her day. If not that, it would be about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked, and wanted to end things. The last one freaked me out the most. I was worried about her because we lived in different states, and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation for so long my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she dropped that conversation, and we talked like we were before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time, and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours at a time, and her texts would come in until 3 or 4 in the morning. The thing was, it was mainly her talking now. Every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I can read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation, when not long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks, or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week, or spends the entire weekend texting me nonstop. The topics of her self-worth have also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye, or I can't live like this anymore, without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me pictures of her, marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and every time I would panic and message her after, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, the group chat with her other friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently, drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked/unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in messages, and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it, and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like shit all the time. So I messaged the group chat that I had enough of them, and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone I talked to, deleted my messaging account, and deleted the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. I later found out that all of the pictures Haley had sent me were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things didn't add up. I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me, meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the picture of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. For almost 3 months, I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have many better friends now, and I am absolutely certain I will never have to hear from Haley again. But sometimes, I still wonder who that woman really was, and what was it about me that she was interested in. Hopefully, I won't ever find out. For clarification, and the fact I got tired of explaining it in the comments section, the pictures she would send me when we would message each other were all pictures of her friends and family, places she claimed to have been to, and items she owned. A few weeks after I blocked Haley, I found them stored on my computer. I got curious, so I reversed image searched the pictures she sent me, and they were all stock photos. Every result I found from her picture led back to a stock photo site, with the only difference between them being that she cropped out the logo of the site from the pictures. Basically, I was lied to a lot. So I started texting someone I met on a dating app. They made the convo super 18 plus as soon as we moved to text. I wasn't playing into it as I was currently at a family Christmas party, 2 p.m. He would get upset and ask if his magic wand wasn't good enough. He would send more and more photos trying to get me to reply, but since I was at a family event that he also knew I was at, I didn't find it the best time or place to look at any texts from him. Before I stopped opening his messages, he felt the need to ask me if his photos made me wet. When I told him that I wasn't even thinking or looking at them cause I was with family and currently holding my 5-month-old nephew, he replied with, "So, you can still be wet." I am sorry, what? When I got home I decided to take a bath cause the day I had was rough. He's now blowing up my phone wondering where I went and if I was finally home yet. Mind you, I told him I was busy and may not reply till later in the night. I've known this man for 5 hours at this point. He asked me what I was thinking about after I got home, 9 p.m., and I told him sleep TBH. He didn't like the reply I gave him and asked me why I wasn't thinking about the photos he sent me and how I couldn't go back and look at them. This dude was nothing but provocative with me, and I turned it down many times. Telling him I was upset due to a recent breakup and not looking for hookups. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept spamming my phone and calling me even when I told him I was heading to bed. I was drinking the same night to unwind from the long day I spent with family. He woke me up questioning me as to why I wasn't talking to him, because he wanted to talk to me, so I should be there to talk to him. I told him I was sleeping and didn't want to talk. This man asked me, "Well, aren't you drunk? Shouldn't you be in the mood?" Like, really? I ended up hanging up on him and ignoring any messages from him until the morning. I didn't reply until later in the afternoon, and by this time another gentleman I had met a few weeks before asked me on a date. I of course said yes and had a great time. Said date, and I drank at his place and played some LOL. It got late and we were pretty tipsy from the shots, so I just stayed at his place for the night as I didn't want to drive. This dude ended up calling me at 3 a.m. while I'm laying next to my date. I pick up the phone in a half-asleep daze and say hello. He called to tell me that he was at my apartment complex and wanted me to let him in so we can congregate. Being confused as to how he knew where I lived, I woke up very quickly. I asked him how he knew where my place was, and he proceeded to tell me Facebook and some of my family's pages that I was tagged in. I assume he saw my mom's post when I moved in 2 years ago with the apartment sign in the background of the photo. I never told this man my last name. Freaking out, I woke up my date and let him know what was going on. He takes me back to my house, but we don't go to my door. We look around, and I end up asking him what he was driving. We find the car he's in and drive by slow, and I take down the plates. I call the local sheriff's office and let them know what is going on, so they can send an officer out here to ask this person to leave the property. Once as he is gone, my date waited inside with me for an hour to be sure he wasn't coming back. We then head back to my date's house and proceed to sleep for the remainder of the night. Sadly, it didn't end there. I woke up to a few more texts from a new number I didn't have saved, as his was blocked. It was him asking me why I didn't give him a chance, telling me that I was perfect, but I let my emotions get in the way of what we could have had, telling me how I better not lose my chance at being with someone like him. He thought his 9-inch magic wand was God's gift to the earth, and if I don't take this opportunity now, he'll live the rest of my life wondering what real magic feels like. I had no words for this person. I was stunned. How did someone I didn't even know 24 hours before this turn into what it did? I was really creeped out. I told him more than once to leave me alone, and that I was with someone. He asked me why I picked a stranger over him, as if he wasn't also a stranger just the day before, not even a full day. This dude would say sorry after I snapped on him, around 10:30 p.m., a bit before he showed up at my apartment building. He would say sorry and tell me that it was wrong of him to act that way, but then proceeded to act the way he did. His last text to me was, "No wonder you're still single." Yeah man, no wonder I am still single. The following story is a true story about my family's Christmas vacation back in 1982. This is the article that the Associated Press had in every major newspaper around the country. Enjoy. I'll be home for Christmas, if I don't get out at the rest area. It's a miracle. She made it home. As the old song goes, I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams. Jane's attempt to make it home to Garner for Christmas turned into a nightmare. But she is now able to laugh at the series of episodes that left her coatless, shoeless, and flying over the U.S. after being left by her husband Patrick at a rest area. The couple left their home in Manteca, California with their 2 sons, Jamie, age 12, and Joshua, 8, at 2 p.m. Tuesday, December 21st, planning to drive day and night until they arrived in Garner to spend Christmas with Jane's sister, Pam, and her parents, Jim and Bonnie. The first series of misfortunes began when Interstate 80 was closed due to bad weather, and they had to reroute to the north to Interstate 50. Just as they began to make their way through a mountain pass into Nevada, the road was closed. During their 3-hour wait, they purchased a set of chains. Guaranteed to fit the van, Jane emphasized. But when it was time to put the chains to use, of course they wouldn't fit. After considerable effort, a serviceman was able to link up the chains, and they were once again on their way. For a while, the van broke down in Wyoming at around noon on Weds. For 2 hours they waited for assistance. A highway patrolman arrived and sent out a tow truck to jump the van to get it started. The truck arrived without any jumper cables. After 3 hours, the 4 were on the road again. By now there was quite a bit of lost time to make up. I'd drive a stretch, would pull over, and then Pat would start driving, Jane explained. I went to the back of the van to sleep on the couch, so I'd be rested to drive later. What must have seemed like an eternity, she will not rest, ride in the van, or see Pat and the kids again. During the night, with Pat at the wheel, he pulled into a rest area near North Platte, Nebraska for necessary reasons. While he was away, Jane woke up and decided she'd better use the facilities too. Pat, trying to make up for lost time, jumped into the van and headed on his way, with never a thought that Jane had left the van. Jane, herself in a hurry, had exited the van like many women might. She left her shoes behind, her coat behind. But she took her purse. It cannot be printed what she thought when she came out of the restroom with no van in sight. It did cross her mind that she had come out the wrong door, but a quick check proved that there was only one door. With haste and hysteria, she began pounding on truck drivers' doors. But these men who had pulled into the rest area to catch a few winks had left their trucks running, were oblivious to the disturbance. Jane finally did arouse a trucker and asked that he use his CB to contact Pat on the van's CB radio. But by this time, Pat was out of reach of the radio waves. The truck driver told Jane to notify the sheriff, and the man took after Pat and the van. He was not to find him. "Where are you?" was an unanswerable question put to Jane when she called the North Platte Sheriff's office to explain her plight. "I'd been sleeping and had no idea where Pat had stopped," Jane remarked. Using the telephone number from where she was calling from, the sheriff was able to track her down to where she had locked herself in the bathroom. "I was scared," she admitted. He pounded on the door, and Jane came out to meet her mentor for the next several hours. "They were so very nice to me," she said. For 3 hours they sat and waited, hoping that the highway patrol would find the van and radio the message to them. Finally, at 3 a.m., Jane checked in at the sheriff's office and called her mother in Garner to explain her problem and hoped that Pat might contact her when, or if, he discovered her missing. 250 miles later, Pat and the boys did discover her missing. And then it was by sheer luck. Needing fuel, Pat pulled into a service station near Lincoln, Nebraska. He told the boys to empty out pop cans from the back of the van, but to be very quiet so as not to awaken their mother. Pat wanted to surprise Jane by entering Iowa while she slept. A surprise was certainly in store for them. As Jamie climbed into the rear of the van, he thought his mom looked awfully skinny under her blanket. Curious, he touched the blanket and made the discovery. The young boy's first thought was that she had fallen out the back. Pat's first thought was that she had been kidnapped. Then he remembered the rest stop. Driving into Lincoln, he notified the highway patrol, and soon he and Jane were able to talk with one another and make plans on how to be reunited. "Instead of 6 hours in driving time for Pat to come back and get me," Jane explained, "we decided I should fly out and meet him in Des Moines. And remember, him still socking-footed with no coat." From this point on comes the real nightmare. Jane's first inclination that things could still go amiss came when she phoned the airport, when it opened at 5 a.m., and was put on hold until 5:10 a.m., stated Jane indignantly, asking for the soonest flight to Des Moines. Jane was then asked, "Could you be here in 10 minutes? With a gasp, Jane put the question to the sheriff, who replied, "You'll be there." With red lights flashing and sirens blaring, the sheriff was good at his word and got her to the plane on time. With an 8:45 a.m. arrival time in Des Moines that Thursday morning, and with Pat safely on his way to meet her there, Jane began to relax. She shouldn't have. In the haste of making the plane's schedules, It was not mentioned that the plane made stopovers in Lincoln and Omaha, the same cities that Pat was driving through to reach her in Des Moines. But that was still okay, Jane thought, because she'd soon be in Des Moines and things would be all right. All wrong. Fog canceled the flight to Des Moines, and the plane was held over in Omaha. The scheduling station gave Jane two options. The soonest flight to Des Moines would arrive at noon, but she could take a flight to Kansas City that would go back to Des Moines by 10 a.m. Being a logical person, Jane opted for the second flight. Her reasons being that 1, it was better than sitting in the airport, and 2, she was still without shoes and coat. So, still with no shoes, she boarded the flight to Kansas City, and you guessed it, there was fog. The plane circled for 3 hours before the decision was made to take the plane to Moline, Illinois. Jane was less than thrilled. Here I am flying all over the country without my shoes and coat. By now, Jane was beginning to be quite well known by the flight personnel. The pilot came back to tell the passengers just where they were going. Jane relates. He turned to her and remarked, "But I'm not sure what to do with you," he remarked. Pat and the boys, in the meantime, were patiently waiting in Des Moines for Jane to arrive. Jane had contacted Sister Pam in Garner to let her know of her whereabouts. Pam, in turn, called the Des Moines airport and paged Pat to relay the message of just where Jane was. Remember, she was currently in Moline. So, shoeless and coatless, Jane got off the plane in Moline. She then called the Des Moines airport herself and talked with Pat. She told him she'd feel much better at this point if he and the boys would drive on to Garner without her. He wasn't too happy about it, but he conceded to go on, Jane said. The final straw came when the airport decided to ship me to O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and then onto a flight into Mason City, Jane remarked. This is when I freaked out. It had been hours with no sleep, socking-footed. I told them I wasn't going any further. From an experience like this, friends are made. Just such a friend Jane met on the Kansas City flight. She was trying to get to Cedar Rapids, but Cedar Rapids was fogged in too. After she saw all the troubles I'd been having with the flights, she got off with me and phoned her boyfriend in Cedar Rapids, and he picked us up at Moline, Jane explained. And my dear sister and her husband picked me up in Cedar Rapids, Jane said with a sigh. She arrived safe, a little unsound, in Garner at 10:30 p.m. Thursday, almost 20 hours after being left at the rest stop. How did it feel to be home? I was so happy, she said. My kids hugged and hugged me, and the youngest just wouldn't let me go. The family make the drive home to Garner every other year, says Jane, but never again in the winter, only in the summer, she said with a laugh. Leaving this Wednesday morning, providing the weather is favorable. Jane has no qualms that she could be left behind somewhere. Pat is driving an Iowa mold tooling truck to be delivered near their home, and Jane will be the sole driver in the van.